So welcome back to Altair Insights Podcast. Today with us we have an interesting guest. So I will not try to mispronounce your name or surname. So maybe I'm just gonna let yourself introduce to the audience and let them know what you're currently working on.
Yes, thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. My name is Lachezar Lechev. I'm from Bulgaria. I can explain myself with a few words, just saying that I'm a community person. I think that sums it all. I'm involved in a few organizations trying to push open source and into the space domain. And for 2 years now, I have my own company trying to move things around here in Bulgaria. And we're probably going to talk more about that here in the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So again, for the people, just to explain a little bit more. So AeroRust community, right? So can you tell us a little bit more about your experience, in the space industry? Obviously, if because we're talking about aerospace and the space industry and Altair, we discuss a lot with the people in this industry as well. And what led you into involvement in open source community? So maybe kind of give them a little bit more of a backstory.
Yeah, sure. I think like 4 years ago, I started a Rust position, which I didn't have experience with previously, and it was quite early in the Rust ecosystem for opportunities. But I always wanted to start somewhere in aerospace. The problem that I faced was that first in Bulgaria you don't have the space domain is not really developed yet. We have previous history and there are a few companies right now, but the problem is that there are not positions currently, that many at least, and especially with Rust, they've only lately started popping up. So Rust, around that.
So can we let people know what Rust is, just for them to?
Yeah, of course. Rust is a programming language. It was developed inside Mozilla, and right now it's I guess the places that it's being used mostly is like cloud computing. Currently, embedded programming is also popping up everywhere, and the ecosystem is evolving every day, which is great for the community. And in general, it's a very welcoming environment, I would say.
Yeah. So what would you say, Lachezar? So from the perspective of you talking about Bulgaria, and I think I'm going to be right when I'm going to say that there is a company. Well, we know a company familiar with Endurosat, so they're from Bulgaria, right?
Yes.
And while we speak in the development of there's a lot of countries, by the way, and I don't know where you guys are watching from. Well, we kind of know where you're watching from, but obviously as we get new people coming through. If you're watching from a developing country in terms of the space activities, I'd love to get your perspective of what's happening inside of the space industry and how is it evolving, and maybe you can give some projections, let's say 5 to 10 years, if you have that insight into that, and what do you think the role of the open source projects will play in that evolution as well? Maybe talking about Bulgaria specifically.
For sure. I think the space industry in general will flourish basically in the next few years. The question is in what direction, as always.
Yeah.
Because we've seen many times that in the open source communities, there's usually a lack of funding. And I guess that's one of my goals in the community. I personally don't have experience in any aerospace company. I started kind of the opposite way around, so start my way from the bottom up. But you learn as you go, and so far I've learned so much, and I haven't even begun to scratch the surface. So that's quite interesting. But as well, like the space domain is very, very challenging, right? You have one of the most challenging environments. So everything there is on the limits, and that's what makes it very interesting to me. So in that term, of course, open source has played a big role, for example, in computing. All the most of the servers are Linux based, and that's an open source project. So I hope this continues in the space industry.
So speaking about the funding, I mean, that's a big topic right here. So, can you talk about lack of that, funding for open source projects in particular in the space area, and how that could be resolved? What ways do you see that being resolved?
Yeah, I can maybe say more about the Rust ecosystem because I have a better look there. But right now, for example, the embedded ecosystem is really growing. The one issue is that, of course, there's not enough funding for these kind of projects. Even though there are many projects, right now they're underdeveloped. They're missing features, or you don't have even tooling for some of the things. And this bridge has to be, this gap has to be bridged somehow. So I hope that more organizations figure out that open source is something that they can work towards, not only standardization, but it's like a tool for standardization as well. Because if you somehow manage to set a given project as a way to do something, given, let's say, a protocol, for example, and you have a few open source projects that are well funded and companies are using them, then of course this will somehow standardize itself, so it will grow in that way.
So and then so maybe forgive some examples again for people and companies, again, understanding the benefits of it. So talking about, making that standardized version, right? So maybe we can talk and look from one perspective, which is the challenges that, let's say, some of those developing countries, let's say, including Bulgaria, in terms of those space activities that are facing, and how those open source projects can help to address and help them with those challenges.
Yeah, we've already seen that a few NASA projects are open sourced and are widely used. So
can you name some of those?
Yeah, I believe there's the F prime framework, which it's also used, if I'm not mistaken, on Ingenuity. So it's like a framework for flight software framework. There is, I keep forgetting the name, but there was one tool for simulating, for example, your mission, how the satellite will orbit, and you can do mission planning with it.
Yeah. Well, these are not small projects, right? These are big projects.
Yeah, yeah, as well. I think there is also one C library which is for a commonly used CubeSat protocol, libcsp, I believe it was. And that's also apparently quite widely used because, yeah, CubeSats. It makes it much easier to develop stuff. Yeah, and these are the few ones that I can remember from the top of my head.
That's awesome. Okay. For the people, aerorust.org. So that's your website for them to go and check it out. And you have a nice, big enough community, because I checked it out, the website, and it's awesome. I do recommend people to check it out. You're going to find that link in a description or a comment section. Question for you is about the role of communities and supporting advancing open source projects in the space industry. So can you talk about that more?
Yeah, and I actually can tell you we are preparing workshop, and we're going to open source it, of course. One of the people on the workshop team, I believe he's now in South Africa, and he's really interested in, of course, his skills on Rust, to develop his skills in Rust, but also he's also quite interested in the aerospace domain in general. And of course, that kind of people will have access to this workshop, which of course we have some targets to be accessible for people. So cheap materials, the board is very inexpensive as well. And of course, it can be used for different things. And for example, this workshop, it won't be like creating your own actual CubeSat, but it's going to mimic a nanosatellite subsystem.
Mm.
So you have solar panels, a battery. We're going to, assemble that, a main board, which you of course program on that workshop. And the main idea there is to showcase what Rust is capable of and how easy it is to do something, or not yet, because of the ecosystem again. And of course, we are trying to involve as many people as possible, because yes, we're going to perform this workshop here in Plovdiv in June, hopefully. We should announce something next week. But also to later develop it further, so add more things, and maybe do a training for, as an idea, of course, I have to make it as a training course for companies. So if they want to teach their personnel Rust, let's say in Eurosat, because I've already spoken with them a few times. There are a few people interested in Rust. However, they don't see the benefits yet, or they don't want to introduce it yet. So that's like a good stepping stone to show them what's possible, and hey, this is how you can do it if you want in the future or now. So we want to showcase that, and that's part of the community work to to develop this area in the Rust ecosystem.
Okay, well, and maybe we're gonna have in Eurosat some of the people listening on this podcast, so maybe can emphasize, and again for the companies out there also, to the importance of using Rust, right? So can you talk also about the lack of funding for open source projects, and particularly, let's say in Bulgaria or maybe some other countries, because again, you have a very nice community on your website, and the effects, the negative effects of the development of the space industry. So they understand the importance a little bit better, right? Kind of be more aware that,
I can start with Rust, and to get straight to the point, I never found, not the time, but more the interest to learn C and C++, and usually that's the languages that you usually use for such applications, and of course Ada. However, for me, C and C++ have always been, challenging, and something that I couldn't understand. And when Rust came out and I started learning it, then, well, slowly but surely things started clicking. And now I just don't want to even try learning C and C++. Maybe for some applications, when you want to build a bridge between them, the so-called bindings. However, I don't feel the need to learn C and C++ to code in them. The added benefits of the language itself has been shown many times before. Even Windows, on Windows, there was a report from Microsoft saying that 70% of their bugs were related to memory issues. So dangling pointers, free use after free, and so on. So Rust handles these cases by the compiler, not by the developer. So it doesn't have like a garbage collector, but just the compiler makes sure before it compiles, given a set of rules, that these rules won't be broken.
Okay. Well, maybe I need to attend and understand the subject a little bit more. So maybe we can include also information about the workshop a little bit more, because it's a very interesting topic, obviously, right? But for the people out there who are working on open source projects, and maybe can speak about, again, based on your community experience, your own personal experience, in terms of finding those creative ways to secure funding for some of those projects.
Yeah, I believe the main issue is that you have to justify, these fundings. You have to have a business model. You have to, wrap it in such a way even for private organizations to fund it, or VCs, You have to have a way to make money. And oftentimes, what happens is I have an idea, I start a project, or I create a library, and it's a really good library, right? Maybe I set up sponsorships, maybe I don't, but I just keep working on it. And that's how the community actually grows. New ideas are born. It's I believe that's a good way to create new things, right? To research as well, because small projects like that can explore different ideas, and some of them will become very popular because of these ideas. And yeah, there are many projects like that.
And you mentioned about the business model. So how can someone, let's say, determine if they have a good idea or not a good idea that will be viable for potentially for funding?
Yeah, well, that's something I'm trying to figure out myself as well. I think I found a few ways that this can happen, and seeing the community, I see like a few models. I think even the Libre Space Foundation did a research topic, a research paper on that topic, and they distinguished a few models, an open source models, for making money basically from open source. I
Could you share
personally
some
have,
of those if you still remember?
Yeah, so one of them, I think I'm more focused towards it. It's to have like an open source core, and then provide additional tooling around it, or for example, you have a core, but then the implementation can be paid, for example, like licensed. There's also if someone needs a feature, then maybe they can sponsor the project so that this feature gets built. That's another way to do it.
So it's not really going to become fully open source, but if you really want to monetize it and make it a solid business model, right?
Yeah, so either you propose support, whether that is developing new features or bug fixes, or you find some other way on top of this core to build your business model.
Interesting. Okay. So let me see. So what else do we have? So how do we make sure, again, we talk about in this industry right now, it's a very, I would call it popular topic, but obviously I think that's only the one way that we have to look at in the space industry, because other industries are already looking through that particular lens. And I'm talking about sustainability. And now we see that lens is now being applied to the space industry as well, because we have a lot of different issues. At the same time, we're increasing number of satellite operators, and space debris, as you know, is a tremendous issue. And obviously we have companies tackling these issues, which is great. And how do we make sure that we ensure open source projects in the space industry that they will be also sustainable in the long run? What do you think?
Yeah, sustainability is a big topic lately, and honestly, I'm very much for it, because I see what happens to our nature when we destroy it or change it. So we have to take care of it. The same applies for space. We have to take care of it in order to, not clutter it with junk that will be a problem for the coming decades. Well, open source, yeah. How can that help? Well, for sure, standardizing and creating tools that make us build better software. If your satellite doesn't crash, if you have tooling out of the box like Linux, you get a Docker container and you have Linux installed in it, and you can start your application in a containerized way. So that already helps, because you have an abstraction that's available to everyone, and it's very easy to just get started with it. And I believe that's the same for applying it to space, because if we already have a very solid core that we can build on, whether this would be new spacecraft and so on, then and not only for spacecraft, even management systems, to track debris and so on, will help in that regard. And we've seen, or at least I've seen, a lot of companies, of course, building their own products for tackling this issue. But really, this at the end should be open sourced and should be, like a distributed system for handling such things. So debris should be given. So debris collision, debris, notification, avoidance. It should all be given somehow, really, or open sourced.
Yeah, I agree, because if more people contribute to this could be resolved quicker rather than going through the private route, right?
Yeah.
So, and everybody should contribute, which is a nice side of things. Especially, you mentioned a big issue that we still have an issue, which is space traffic management system and lack of it. Well, actually, there's none. So the infrastructure is not there, but creating something through open source that everybody can contribute, people across the world, and add their perspectives and how actually that issue could be tackled. So big thing, right? How can somebody, let's say, that's coming through, we're talking about making that a solid business model, making sure that you're making income, that becomes a real business. How those messages spread, at least through the community, going back to is the idea is going to be worthwhile to pursue from the business perspective? Is there a way to really find out? I mean, for people just dropping that in the community, I mean, what success stories maybe you can share from your community that it helped them to make their open source project spread like a wildfire, if we can say that?
I'm not sure if I can give you an example for open source project in the space industry.
Oh no, it doesn't have to be space.
Yeah, but there are a few projects that are seeing quite a good community growth. Even open source project, just only open source project without business models. And they see good success. Game engines, for example, Bevy is one of them. Their community is huge on Discord, and it's very, very active. People are talking to use it for simulations. The other day on the meetup that we had in AeroRust, someone shared a video from Bevy Discord showcasing like orbital mechanics. So someone was building like a game where you can have a spacecraft and send it on different orbits and so on. And that's a really good indication that that community is working good and growing.
So sorry for interrupting.
No worries.
What is the success formula, do you think, for some of those projects out there? Is there a success formula, or they just become unique and that's how they attract their attention, or they follow a specific blueprint, as you think?
Yeah, I believe there are a few blueprints, because I don't believe Bevy has like a business model, so they only rely on the community, and of course they're sponsoring there, a lot of sponsorships. So that's really good. I've already seen companies in the Rust community, sponsoring all the other projects, which is also a very good indication. But for example, with Bevy, you have to have a big community, right? So you have to manage a community. And for example, I've been struggling with this in AeroRust because yes, there are a lot of people, but it's still very complex to make them talk to each other. To have discussions. And yes, there are active ones, but there are a lot of people that are just observers, and this is a challenge with communities. And of course then you get to the other task of just project management and other projects and roadmaps, and that's a lot if you're a small community with a few core people that are working on that. And for other projects, they either rely on sponsorships or they find other ways to monetize their work.
I see. Okay. Going back to the community, because I think, I'd like to expand on that a little bit more. And I completely imagine what you're describing is some of the key members that could be just out there. For them, it's easy to describe their projects or be involved, and they're just out there, in front of things, right? Some other people might be more like in a shell, right? And they feel like, well, I don't know, do I know enough? Even though I know a lot of people that know more than enough to actually be there in front, of the audiences, of the people, of the projects, but they just don't feel like it themselves. and sometimes they need encouragement. But what do you think also, having your own, AeroRust community, what will be, a thing that could help those people either to come out of the shells, to be more involved, engage more? What do you think will be an advice there?
Yeah, just go and, start asking, start discussing, because that's how you learn. And again, speaking for the Rust ecosystem and the Rust communities, most of them are very, very welcoming. So no matter your question, they won't tell you, you're stupid or something like that. Most of the time,
there's no stupid questions, of course.
Yeah, and regarding, the aerospace industry or domain in general, it's a very complex topic because you have so many disciplines. It's basically all the disciplines at one place, It's all the disciplines. You cannot know everything. It's just impossible because you're just one. So until you find something that you're really passionate about and you want to dig deeper and then start learning more and more and more, see if that's the thing that you want to pursue. That's one way of doing it, and I believe that's the good approach. Try different things, see what you like. Maybe you change your mind, maybe you start something new to learn. But usually this knowledge continues to grow. Even if you switch your focus, you still have the knowledge from before, and you always find a way to apply it to something else.
That's a good point. Exactly. Going back to your community, how do you see that evolving in the next years from now? And what opportunities do you think your community will create specifically for the space industry?
Since the start, I believe that I want to find a way to fund open source work. For example, a few weeks ago, there was a PEX, because Bulgaria is not a member state of, member state of ESA, the European Space Agency. And we have this special program called PEX, which we are in. So this gives us like a small, very limited way we can engage with ESA. And right now, it's only Bulgarian company that can work primarily on those projects. So you don't compete with big companies from abroad. You're just competing here in Bulgaria. And that's also challenging because the points that we get, they're very low. So we have to learn how to write proposals and, of course, to do those projects to get the funding. But for example, they only have like 20%, how do you say it? Only like 20% of the work can be performed outside of Bulgaria. Because it's also funded by Bulgaria. So the country funds, the government funds the amount of money that we are going to win on those projects. And for example, it's only 20% in Europe. So if I want to help our colleague or our member from South Africa who wants to do something like that, I cannot give him, projects to work on and later pay out of those money. So I have to find another way to set aside some funding for him specifically. And the way I think it could work is grants, at least initially. I have something that I want to be created, open sourced, whether this would be a protocol or some library or anything like that. And then I propose this grant. Someone picks it up and makes it for 2 months, for example.
I see. And finally, what would be the message for the people, for those who are interested, the ones who listened for the entire episode, or maybe they already went to aerorust.org to check out, and hopefully they sign up to join a community member. If they're interested to support open source projects, and particularly with your community, how they can take part in this?
Yeah, definitely contributing to open source projects that we already have, or discussing possible projects in the community is one way. I believe a big role will play the organizations themselves. So if they're part of an organization and they really like the idea of, this funding open source projects, a good starting point is to really discuss it with, their organization and how they can, set aside resources for open source, and supporting such communities, because AeroRust is not the only community that lacks, funding, or, there aren't enough libraries for it and projects. So yeah, I would say that's the two main things that that I would like to give them as something to take home. First, just start contributing. That's the best way. It doesn't really matter what it is. We have very simple issues that you can work on. That's not a problem. Mostly the problem is project management. How do you organize that work?
Yeah.
And second, talk with your employer, organization, see if you can help such communities in general.
Perfect. Okay, that sounds like a good start. So again, thank you for providing this insight, because obviously, as you understand, I'm not an expert, I'm not going to try and call myself that, or even, because that's a very new topic for me. And that's why it was very interesting to get you here today on the podcast to talk about, again, your community, aerorust.org. Again, people can go and check it out. And once again, if they're already interested with, in open source projects, obviously I highly recommend for them to get in contact with you. LinkedIn is a good option. We're just going to put all the social media as you're available on Twitter, LinkedIn, and obviously the website, so they can follow the news, get in contact with you, maybe get off the shell and, start asking a few questions before they get into the community, but just being involved. All right.
Yeah.
I think you provided enough for people to realize the potential of it, of using open source, how open source projects will take part in the space industry, importance of it, especially when it comes to tackling these big issues that we currently have, and the benefits of it, of them actually working on some of those projects. So it's very interesting from my point of view. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and again, thank you for inviting me. And I hope it was clear enough how people can help.
As it was. I definitely appreciate that. So again, guys, for you, if you enjoyed this episode, just a quick thing, make sure to share this episode. That's all I want to ask, because it's all about spreading knowledge to the people who need it. And if you know somebody who might be remotely interested to hear what today we discussed on this podcast episode, share that with your friend and pass on that knowledge, and it's greatly appreciated. So thank you once again for coming over and for your time, and to everybody else, I wish you a great day, and I'll see you next time. I appreciate it.